Welcome to Successfully Ambiguous, the podcast that asks, when opportunity knocks, will you be ready to answer? I'm Christine Brooks-Cappadocia, Assistant Vice President of Continuing Studies at York University in Toronto, Canada. Today we're going to meet Anika Forde, a multi-hyphenated powerhouse who brings together her experience as a venture capitalist and as an educator and researcher to build community and make something that is so much better than the sum of its parts for all participants. We're going to take a question from the mailbag and ask Anika how she builds social capital by asking for what she wants and how you can do the same. We don't all have the same sorts of connections, and being able to ask for what we want and then build those connections and can add huge value to our careers. So let's open the door and meet Anika. Anika Forde is you are just one of those multi-hyphenated women who has excelled in so many fields and brings those diverse fields together. And it's one of the things that I enjoy most about talking about you and with you, obviously, is how you brought all these various aspects of your life together into a package that is even greater than the sum of its parts. For our listeners, I first met Anika in her role as Director of Research for the Jean Augustine Chair in Education, Community, and Diasporas, but she is a venture capitalist. She has a tech background. You've done work all over the world with your companies and brought all of the various pieces, obviously an educator and researcher, all of the various pieces of you come together to something just makes the world a better place. So welcome, first of all, to the podcast. It's just such a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Christine. It's also a pleasure to always have conversations about the many things that I'm involved in, and even yourself. So this is great.
I've been impressed with you for years, but when we were at an event you hosted in our School of Continuing Studies building, the way the young researchers you work with and the way the research is framed in the various projects you're working on to grow and build in community and build in the interests of the community. I've never seen a research project that evolves in that sort of way. Do you want to talk a little bit about your philosophy and how you bring all these things together?
Yeah, I think using the example of the event that you just shared was a really nice opportunity to appreciate everyone who has facilitated the work that we've been engaged with. But more importantly, I think it was a really, really significant opportunity for me as a director and someone who has built the team to really acknowledge the work that everybody else has done on my team that has facilitated the bigger picture. And you gave an example of the parts and the sum, right? And I think that oftentimes we lose the plot somewhere along the line as leaders in one way or another, that the more we are able to uplift others, the more that we're able to pour into others, the greater whatever that commitment is or whatever that work is that we're doing can be. And so if you ask my philosophy, I think partly I'm a creative, I'm innovative, and more importantly, I'm a servant leader. I think it's really important to serve the needs, gifts, and talents of others. And I think it just makes everything else shine brighter.
Absolutely. I often think of you as an abundant, someone who leads from a spirit of abundance, right? If you lead from the spirit of scarcity, then it's a zero-sum game. But if you lead from a spirit of abundance, there is plenty for everyone. And in fact, there is more. We've had conversations about the evolving future of work, and I know your new research is focused on this and something that we've chatted about a number of times. And it's actually the reason we have this podcast is that careers are changing so quickly, and we still have this very old philosophy that we knew what we wanted to do when we were children. We were asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? I don't know about you. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I would have never imagined what I'm doing now. And you are so many things at once that I'm not sure that you could have answered that question as a 5-year-old either. But I don't think we can answer who will be in 6 months. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the things you're researching and how they might benefit viewers who are in this?
I'd like to point out one thing that you mentioned or lean into one thing before I talk about what I'm doing. Um, I don't think it's a fair question to ask young people. I don't think it's a fair question to ask anyone. What do you want to be when you grow up? I think throughout our life course, we lean into our different gifts and talents, and we cultivate and nurture those. And we hope that we're able to connect with individuals that see some things within ourselves that we often don't see, and give us that like extra nudge to say, "Hey, have you thought about this?" Or, I think a conversation with so and so would be really beneficial for you. And I think those moments are really defining moments in our career trajectories and our educational trajectories and just over the life course. And so with that said, would I have been able to to say exactly where I'd be right now? No. The 5, or I would say 8-year-old self, because I had a really good moment at 8 years old, knowing kind of where I wanted to be, but not what that title would be, right? And so much of what keeps me up at night now is how do we think about supporting young people, but also those who are professionals who are maybe in a career pivot or thinking about trying something new. How do we enable and support them to think about the possibilities that there are without thinking about a title per se? And so what do I mean by that? As it relates to future of work, much of the jobs that we have today will not exist in 5 years, let alone 10 years, maybe even 3 years, because the velocity of change, right? And so I think it's an unfair and unreasonable expectation to ask someone, what do you want to be right now? Well, yeah, you might pick something right now, but in 3 years, when you're in that role, you've worked in that role, you might notice, well, hey, I have a knack for change management, or I have a knack for team building, and you might end up in a completely different role that facilitates or uses the gifts even in a different way. I think, to answer your question, because I don't want to ramble on, to answer your question on what would I share with your viewers, or those tuning in. I think it's really important to approach things with an open, flexible mind, knock on many doors, because open doors lead to conversations, coffee chats, walks in the park, that can spark something in you and ignite something in you that you may not have thought of, and then have the courage to continue the conversation and ask, "Hey, this may not be your area, but might you know someone in your network that can connect me or give me more information?" And be open to following those different pathways of opportunity, because it really does enrich your experience in terms of navigating what's possible, but also just opens up tremendous opportunity, and opportunities that we may just not have been exposed to or thought of.
And it's an interesting way. Many of the students and the people we both interact with regularly may not have the same levels of social capital that we do. So this is such a concrete way to build that social capital, right? It's not just the chat; it's the chat and then the invitation to help further.
Absolutely.
And
Uh,
as somebody who's occasionally asked
mm,
to make the next introduction, I love that when people ask me that, right? It's we're often afraid to make that ask, but as the person being asked, it's a great feeling to be asked.
I would agree. I think most people, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but I do think that there's a fear around even asking, because we often don't know within ourselves what to ask. And so that in itself kind of stops you in your tracks, right? And I do hear from undergrads, graduates, and I even hear from some school age kids, well, I was afraid to ask, right? And even those that are even in senior management roles, sometimes you're just afraid to even ask your boss, "Hey, I'm thinking about pursuing this. Might I hear your thoughts? Might you know someone that can guide me?" And so I think we're often allowing failure to stop us in our tracks before we even get to really think about making those connections or asking for a connection, because we're afraid we don't have enough information or, enough confidence to ask the question, "Can you make that introduction?"
Do you find that influences one of the things I think that's surprising about well, perhaps surprising for me since I met you in an academic context, is your background as a venture capitalist.
Yeah.
You don't meet many academics who are also venture capitalists and running
Yeah.
global businesses. Do you think we're often afraid to ask? My educational background, some of it is in the startup innovation space. Are we afraid to make the ask to get to where we want in terms of starting new companies and asking for venture capital?
I definitely think so. Yes, I do. I think all of us are operating with on the spectrum of failure in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's a matter of acknowledging it. What are you afraid of? Why are you afraid of it? And tackling it head on, or at least getting some cheerleaders and support around you that can help you push through some of those fears so that you can get to the other side of it, because the other side of it is amazing. And I think it's interesting because entering into the VC or venture capitalist space, as an investor who, like, I largely focus on women-led tech startups. But being in this space also was quite interesting because I had invested in other projects in past. So, on the continent, I've invested in rice farming and some agricultural projects that have been quite successful and quite interesting as well. And I never really thought of myself as a venture capitalist until a friend of mine said, "Well, Anika, I think I should introduce you to this person because you're doing such amazing things. I know you're in academia, but you already do this." And I said, "What? Like VC? That's not my space. Like I have like some investments and I also build houses and do cool stuff with that, but I'm not in the VC space." And he's like, "Yeah, you actually are." And I said, "Okay." He's like, "Oh, well, I've already messaged her and I told her you're showing up at this event." So I couldn't back out, right? I literally couldn't back out. And he showed me the message. Social media is quite the thing. He showed me the message and sent my profile to her as well and said, "Oh, she's going to show up at your event on Friday." And literally from there, uh, it has been an amazing experience to dive in and be part of this ecosystem. Um, and partly because you have to, like, it really pushes you to be comfortable with failure and failing forward. And I think that's a really big part of, the way I look at failure is always our first attempt in learning. And you can learn something more than once, right? And you might be learning different lessons from different failures. And I think that this ecosystem in particular, you have to be willing to fail and fail forward over and over and over again. Otherwise, you may not get to where you're hoping to go. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that I I love that you picked up and owned the title after it was in some ways described, given to you by somebody external, because we often do that. I've spent my early career in the arts. I'm a better collector now than I am an actual practicing artist. But it wasn't until I had a conversation with a dear friend of mine that she said, you're still doing art. You're still, doing the creative process.
Yeah.
Still art. I apply it to different things now, community building and education. So I love that. I also love that you're constantly learning. I
Yeah.
think just since January, I've heard of three educational programs you're currently taking as a learner yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Uh,
what's inspiring you to do that?
um, it's interesting because I want to use the analogy of being in the VC space or, being an investor. I think that you, over your life course, you invest into so many different things. Invest in self, invest in others, invest in projects, invest in community, and invest in contributing to things that are just much larger than self. And so, arguably, I think that investment in change seems to be my backbone. So, I mean, I think that I've leaned into it, I've embraced it, and I kind of just run with it, because I do think it's important to constantly question and be critical of the world we're living in, because the only thing constant really is change. And so, how are we keeping up with that? But also, what are we doing to challenge ourselves? And so that's a big part of me staying current, I guess, with my learning, and not necessarily because someone else thinks it's useful, but because I know that there's value in it, and there's value in knowing that you don't know all things, right? So it's okay to know that I don't know everything, and really own that, and continue learning.
I love that you framed it as an investment in self and community. And because we often think about, I don't often think about the work. We've had this conversation a few times about how doing well helps you do more good in many ways, right? There's a position of power that comes with having been perceived already as successful and saying, this is somewhere I think we can collectively make a difference, as opposed to coming from a position of always asking others to contribute. You get to lead in your contribution, your investment,
Yeah.
whether that's an investment of ideas or time or money. It comes from a different place if you're coming from a position of strength. And I'm so inspired by the way you think about contributing to your world and in uplifting others to think about that. So I'm going to ask you a question and ask you to give back one more time.
Okay.
But a question from a viewer who knows they have the skills, knows they have the fortitude that and the ability to learn and problem solve, that if they were just given a chance, they could make a great difference. But how do they get that door open, be given the chance? How do they get noticed?
Wow, that's a big one. I think that there isn't a catch-all solution or a catch-all answer to that, but I will say in my experience and what I've observed with others and over the course of my research, and also work that I do in supporting I guess career navigators, right? If I will, at any age, a little bit of research, kind of doing, there's so much at our fingertips. So if we have access, to a computer system or the internet, or some means of getting online, I would say, go on, take a little Google, and see what others are doing in this space. What names pop up? Individuals that you find interesting. Is there something that piques your interest or attention there? And see if you're able to connect and reach out. I think that many of us are afraid to, in many ways, send an email, send a note to someone we do not know. But I think it's quite powerful to do so. I was literally just in at Ivy School of Business, getting my certification in the VC space, actually, women in venture capital. And one of the things that stood out with every single speaker, they said they reached out, did lots of cold calling, and they actually kept a tracker of who they contacted and when. And they said it's okay to message, to call back, follow up, because that conversation can be the difference. And so, with that being said, I would recommend doing a little bit of, searching, asking questions, asking your immediate network, going onto the web and taking a look, and then putting yourself out there by sending a few emails or messages. Even phone numbers are available sometimes, right? And give a call and say, hey, I would love to have a moment to chat with you. Would you be willing to sit with me? And go from there. And it's also okay if you have, a creative or innovative idea that you want to share with them, to show that, you are really interested and it's more than just a transaction, right? And I think people can feel that and sense that if you're going in transactional, oftentimes that's probably not the best approach. but going in, reaching out, and from a genuine place of, hey, I'm interested, and I think that you might be able to help me get to my next step, and vice versa, perhaps. It really goes a long way. There's at every point of my career, there has been someone who has said something that has facilitated my next step. And I know that I've also done that for a number of people. And I think it really does make a huge difference. And I say this, Christine, knowing very well that, there are constraints and limitations that people do experience as well. Not everyone has access to the same tools and resources and individuals. And so I think that that's part of a bigger social issue or challenge that I'm hoping to lean into more, because I recognize the power of relationships and connections, and that not everyone has the same access and exposure, and that can be a serious limitation. So, there are some caveats to what I suggested, but I think it's our responsibility that, like myself or you and others who have the ability to make those connections, to tap on shoulders of those who may not even know that that a door could be open, to let them know that we can do so.
I think that's a perfect place to end our conversation with a call to the listeners too. You don't necessarily know the opportunity you can give someone else. So be open, and you've got a lot more power and a lot more opportunity to provide than you realize, no matter whether you're at the top of your career, if you're just starting out, or somewhere in the middle. Open a door. And I love how you framed the investing in the relationship. It is a relationship, not a transaction. So please be that door opener for others as well. Anika, I have so enjoyed talking to you as always. Thank you so much for being on the pod today.
Thank you so much for having me, Christine.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Successfully Ambiguous. Be sure to leave your comments below or find me on LinkedIn and ask your career questions. Like or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And join us for the next episode so that when opportunity knocks, you'll be ready to answer.